everyone, how are you doing today? My name is Rania and 2019 is finally over. Let me tell you, this year has felt like a forever to me and I'm so glad to see it over and so ready to have it in my past. But before that, let's talk about the good things that happened to me in 2019, which is mainly the great books that I read. Here are 10 of my favorite books that I read in 2019. The first book I want to talk about today is what I talk about when I talk about running by Haruki Murakami. There's a lot of talking in that sentence. This book is Haruki Murakami's memoirs about his journey as a writer. He talks about how he transitioned from owning a jazz bar to the writer that we know today. And the one thing that resonated with me about this book is that how he talks about writing as if it's running or as if he's preparing for a marathon. He mentions that writing books is a little like a marathon. He compares this a lot and he says that it's not a sprint, it's something that you have to do every day. And honestly, I admire Murakami for being able to write every day, which is something that blows my mind, and also run. I found myself thinking about this book a lot after I finished it, and it taught me a lot about writing. The second book I want to talk about is, of course, because I cannot not to mention John Green. It's Turtles All the Way Down. What can I say? This book is a small story, that's for sure. I felt like John Green made a small story after the huge story that is The Fault in Our Stars. This book depicts anxiety like nothing else. I know it's because John Green himself, he's struggling with OCD, and it's just raw, it's amazing, it talks about a lot of things, and most importantly, it's a fun read, and I always enjoy John Green's books. He's just one of my favorite writers of all time. The third book I loved reading this year is the Grenada Trilogy by Radwa Ashur. This book takes place in the 15th century in what we now know as Spain. The story starts after the falling of the Andalus's Islamic State, and it spans 100 years following this one family through the generations and how they deal with this new regime that's set in. And they're a Muslim family and they have to deal with the Spanish Inquisitions. What I really loved about this book is the characters. I really loved how unique they are, and especially their relationships with each other. The dynamics were amazing. I loved the world building. Radwa Ashur describes it. It's just amazing. Now I want to go to Spain because of it. I really want to go and see it. It's just an amazing book and the story is good. So I read this one in Arabic. I have no idea where my book is. I gave it to a friend probably, as usual. All my books are somehow always not in my hands. But I really love this book and I highly advise you to read it. Especially if you've never read a book about Muslims in the West. Another book I really loved this year is Permanent Records by Edward Snowden. Edward Snowden is someone you would probably recognize from the movie Snowden and the documentary Citizen4. Edward Snowden is an NSA agent that became the whistleblower in 2013 when he leaked documents proving that the US is surveilling citizens. He basically blew out his life in order to tell everyone that Big Brother is indeed watching you. In his memoir, we hear Edward Snowden's story from his own perspective. He talks about his childhood, he talks about his family, he talks about the years when he was working with the American intelligence, and most importantly, he talks about how he came into what he calls whistleblowing and why he chose to do that. I really liked his story told from his own perspective, and he does explain a lot, but most importantly, the heartbreaking parts were after the whistleblowing and how his life looks like now. This book gave me a lot to think about, and I highly recommend it. To the Lighthouse by the great Virginia Woolf. This book follows a family taking their holiday in Scotland as they look at the lighthouse and think about going, but I don't think they go until the very end of the book. As typical of Virginia Woolf and modernist literature, this book isn't about the plot as much as it is about the characters. The characters are amazing. We see the dynamic in the family. We see what it feels like to be a parent, to be a child, to be a wife, to be a husband. Most importantly, what I liked about this book is the depiction of an artist. We see artists struggling to create their art. What is the point of art? And Virginia Woolf deals with these questions brilliantly. Virginia Woolf's writing style demands attention. It demands you to be focused on it, so in order to catch up on everything she's saying, and that's just amazing to me. I think this is something that is accurate for all modernist literature, and this is why I love it, and this is why Virginia Woolf is just an amazing woman, and she's an amazing writer, and I love this book. Another woman that I admire a lot is Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and I read her book, Half of a Yellow Sun. Half of a Yellow Sun is set before and during the Nigerian Civil War. The story jumps between two timelines in order to show us the effects of the war on 5 main characters. Twin daughters, an influential businessman, a houseboy, and an intellectual. These 5 characters are so different, which makes the dynamic between them so amazing to watch. This book talks about the identity of being a black woman, about being a Nigerian, about being a woman, an intellectual, an illiterate houseboy. It just talks about a little bit of everything. And as I grew to expect from Adichie, the story is smart, it's well written, and it is fun to read. The next book I want to talk about is Utopia for Realists and How We Can Get There by this author whose name I can't pronounce. He is a historian who studies civilizations and societies from all over the world, and unlike what you might expect, this is actually a positive intake on the world. This book just is optimistic. He talks about how our lifestyle might seem a little utopic for someone who comes from the 15th century. He also talks about how we're going on the right track and how we can actually improve and be better people. He studies this from a very accurate point of view. He's a historian, so he's someone who knows what he's talking about, and he gives you examples from all over history. It's a positive book that gave me a little bit of hope in a world where I'm constantly surrounded by dystopias. Next is M Train by Patti Smith. Patti Smith is a poet, she's a singer, and she's just an amazing person who writes great memoirs. I have previously read her book, Just Kids, which is a book that I admire so much. It's probably one of my favorite books of all time, and it talks about her journey as a young artist in the 60s. This one is sort of a follow-up to that book, but now we get to see her as an established writer. In M Train, Patti Smith talks about her daily life as an artist. She talks about the little mundane things that she does, and that is something I am interested in, and this is something I want to learn about. She talks about how art shaped her life. She now looks back at her young years that I read about in Just Kid, then she reflects on that. She talks about the small little details. She talks about how art has shaped her life, and reading that story really inspired me a lot, and I just really love it. I think this is the year of memoirs. I've read so many great memoirs this year, and the next memoir I want to talk about is Wild from Lost to Found on the Pacific Crest Trail by Cheryl Strayed. I have watched the movie for this book before, and I loved it, so I picked up this book thinking that I need something light to read, and I really was blown away. The story follows 22-year-old Cheryl when her life was basically a mess. Her mother died, she was divorced, but despite everything, she decides to hike the Pacific Crest Trail. She decided to do this alone. I don't think she was very well prepared for it, and that must have been a little dangerous, but the story is so heartwarming. This is a feminist story about women picking themselves up. The story is about hiking, yes, but to me, it felt like it's a journey into healing and forgiving ourselves. Often it can be easy to forgive others when they do you wrong. What if you are the one who keeps doing you wrong? Can you forgive yourself for all the things that you messed up? And that's just a beautiful message. We all need to learn how to forgive ourselves and not be so harsh on ourselves and just be at peace. And yes, maybe we make mistakes, everyone makes mistakes, but that's not the end of the world. We just have to take the metaphorical hike on the Pacific Crest Trail and forgive ourselves and find peace from within. The last book on my list is no surprise a poetry book, and that is Jamie's Blues by James Baldwin. I discovered James Baldwin this year, and oh my god, I have fallen in love. I read his novels and I read his poetry, and I chose this one because this one is the one that I felt changed my life. James Baldwin is an American writer who lived in New York in the beginning of the 20th century. He is black, he is gay, and he is a brilliant poet. Yes, in his poetry, he talks about a little of everything, and what really hit me close to heart was his writing style. I am someone who enjoys poetry that is, let's say, poetic, meaning that I like metaphors, I like poetry that looks like a puzzle, I like to discover what it is. I don't like my poetry spelled out for me, but this book, it's so raw and honest that it just shocks you and it hits you right in the feels, and it's honestly, I felt like I was going about poetry the wrong way when I read this book. It's just so raw, and there's not much puzzles going in it. He tells you what he thinks, and he just gives you his opinion straightforward, and it's just amazing. I remember when I was reading this book, I was constantly overwhelmed, and by the end I felt like James Baldwin has liberated me as a writer. And for that, he gets a spot on this list. And there we go. These are the 10 books that I really loved this year and has affected me a lot. I hope you enjoyed my pick. Tell me about your favorite books of 2019. Tell me if you read any of these books and if you like them too, so we can chat about them. And I guess that's all I have to say for today. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Salam.